Deleuze's God, the most dangerous idea in history. The fluorescent lights of the Detroit Community Center buzzed with the persistence of dying insects. Maya Rodriguez adjusted her laptop screen, watching the faces of 37 activists scattered across folding chairs in the basement room. Outside, November rain drummed against small windows that revealed glimpses of abandoned lots where wildflowers had begun reclaiming concrete. "We keep thinking in terms of hierarchy," Maya said, her voice cutting through the humid air, thick with coffee and determination. "The union sends directives down, the city council makes decisions for us, the non-profit boards decide our funding. But what if we stop thinking vertically?" A hand shot up from the back. "What do you mean?" asked Jerome, a laid-off auto worker whose calloused fingers still bore traces of machine oil. Maya stood, pacing between the mismatched chairs. "Think about how grass spreads, not from some central root pushing down commands, but sideways underground, connecting in ways you can't see from the surface. Every point touching every other point, creating new possibilities." She clicked to her next slide, a hand-drawn diagram that looked less like an organizational chart and more like a neural network, or maybe the mycelial threads she'd studied in biology class years ago. "This is how we've been organizing our housing defense campaigns," she continued. "Instead of waiting for permission from above, each block connects directly to other blocks. The community garden people talk directly to the anti-eviction teams. The mutual aid networks link up with the immigration support groups. No central command, no single point of failure." An older woman named Dorothy, whose house had been saved from foreclosure 3 months ago, leaned forward. "But how do we coordinate? How do we make sure everyone's on the same page?" "We don't," Maya replied, and the room stirred with uncomfortable energy. "We become the same page. When you're connected at every level, information doesn't need to travel up and down. It flows laterally, transforms as it moves, adapts to local conditions." Jerome frowned. "Sounds like chaos." "Maybe," Maya said, her eyes bright with the intensity that had drawn people to these meetings for months. "But think about what we've accomplished. When the Marshall Street families were getting evicted, we didn't wait for the Housing Coalition to hold a board meeting. The renters called the legal clinic, who called the rapid response team, who called the documentary filmmaker, who called the city council candidate. 6 different actions happening simultaneously, each responding to the others." She paused, looking around the room at faces that had grown familiar through late-night planning sessions and dawn raids to block eviction trucks. "Traditional organizing assumes we know what we want and just need to get there. But what if we don't know what we want? What if we can't know until we start moving together, creating new connections, discovering what becomes possible?" The rain intensified outside, and Maya felt that familiar electric sensation that came when ideas were taking root in fertile ground. These weren't abstract concepts anymore. They were tools being forged in the heat of necessity. "I've been reading this French philosopher," she said almost apologetically. "Gilles Deleuze. He talks about something he calls the rhizome. Not like a tree with roots and branches, but like what we're building here. A network that spreads underground, pops up in unexpected places, creates new connections faster than anyone can map them." Dorothy nodded slowly. "Like how the mutual aid started with food distribution. But now we're doing childcare and legal support and teaching people to fix their own furnaces," added Jerome. "And that led to the tool library, which connected us to the makerspace folks who helped design those portable heat pumps for the families whose utilities got shut off." Maya felt the room's energy shift, the way it always did, when abstract ideas suddenly clicked into lived experience. These weren't academics discussing theory. They were people discovering that the strange, sprawling network they'd built through months of crisis response had a name, a conceptual framework that made their intuitive choices feel less like improvisation and more like revolution. "So when the city tries to shut us down by targeting our leaders," Maya said, "what happens?" "There are no leaders," several voices answered almost in unison, and the room filled with the low rumble of recognition and something deeper, the sound of people realizing they were more powerful than they'd imagined. 3 months later, the network had spread beyond anyone's ability to track. Maya found herself in a converted warehouse in the Corktown district, where the smell of roasted coffee mixed with paint fumes and the sound of power tools. What had started as a community meeting space had become something else entirely, part maker lab, part kitchen, part performance venue, part childcare collective. She was interviewing Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychiatrist who'd been documenting the mental health impacts of their organizing model. Sarah's decision to leave her private practice and join the network full-time had surprised everyone, including herself. "I kept seeing the same patterns in my office," Sarah explained as they sat in mismatched armchairs, surrounded by the controlled chaos of the space. Children's artwork shared wall space with protest banners and circuit board diagrams. People coming in with depression, anxiety, feeling disconnected, purposeless. The traditional model treats these as individual pathologies, but what if they're symptoms of how we're organized socially? Maya adjusted her phone, recording their conversation for the podcast that had emerged organically from their documentation efforts. "How so?" "Think about it," Sarah said, watching a group of teenagers work on what appeared to be some kind of hydroponic system in the corner. "We put people in boxes, your job, your role, your identity category. Then we wonder why they feel trapped, limited, like they can't access parts of themselves." A crash from the kitchen area interrupted them, followed by laughter and rapid Spanish. Maya recognized the voice of Carmen, a restaurant worker who'd become central to their food distribution efforts, but had recently started teaching electronics repair and writing poetry that people performed at their monthly gatherings. "Carmen's a perfect example," Sarah continued. 6 months ago, she saw herself as just a server, struggling with panic attacks, feeling like she was disappearing. Now look at her, teaching, creating, leading, but also being led, learning, following her curiosities wherever they take her. Deleuze would call that becoming us, Maya said. Not being a fixed thing, but being in constant process of transformation. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And it's not just individual transformation. The whole space is constantly becoming something else. Yesterday, this corner was where people came for immigration legal support. Today, it's a workshop on urban farming. Tomorrow, who knows? They were interrupted by Jerome, who'd been spending most of his time lately working on what he called industrial archaeology, documenting the abandoned factories throughout the city and experimenting with ways to retrofit them for community use. "Maya, you need to see this," he said, his excitement palpable. He led them to a large table covered with maps, photographs, and what looked like architectural drawings. "I've been mapping the connections," and he said, pointing to a hand-drawn network that sprawled across a map of Detroit. "Not just our group, but all the similar experiments happening. The food forests in the east side, the cooperative repair shops, the community land trusts, the alternative currency experiments." Maya studied the map, seeing patterns she hadn't noticed before. Red lines connected initiatives that shared resources. Blue lines showed information flows. Green lines marked where different groups had begun collaborating on projects none of them could have imagined alone. "It's like the city is developing its own nervous system," she murmured. "And look at this," Jerome continued, pulling out another map. "These are all the properties that corporate developers have been trying to acquire. But see how they're avoiding certain areas now." Maya looked where he was pointing. The areas being avoided formed an almost perfect outline around the zones where their network was most active. Sarah leaned in closer. "They can't predict you anymore," she said slowly. "Traditional development relies on being able to calculate risk, predict responses, control variables, but you've created something too complex, too fluid." "We've deterritorialized," Maya said, the word feeling strange but accurate in her mouth. "We've escaped their ability to capture and control what we are." Jerome looked confused. "Deterritorialized?" "It's another Deleuze concept," Maya explained. "Territory isn't just geography. It's any system of organization that tries to fix identities, control flows, predict outcomes. When you deterritorialize, you escape those systems of control, create new possibilities they can't anticipate or contain." Through the large windows, they could see the Detroit skyline where corporate towers rose like monuments to vertical thinking. But down here at ground level, something else was spreading. Horizontal, adaptive, impossible to map from above. "So what happens next?" Sarah asked. Maya smiled, realizing she didn't know, and that not knowing felt like power rather than uncertainty. We become whatever we need to become. By spring, the question wasn't what the network had become, but what it was still becoming. Maya stood on the roof of the warehouse, now covered with gardens, solar panels, and what the kids called the communications array, a collection of radio equipment, mesh networking nodes, and weather monitoring devices that had evolved from their emergency preparedness work. The city spread out below, but it looked different now. Where once she'd seen disconnected neighborhoods, abandoned lots, and isolated struggles, she now saw flows of energy, information, and resources that moved in patterns too complex for any map to capture. Dr. Chen climbed up through the rooftop access, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a thick folder of papers. Over the months, their conversations had deepened beyond documentation into something more like collaborative theorizing. "I've been thinking about what you said last week," Sarah said, settling beside Maya on a makeshift bench constructed from reclaimed car seats and scrap metal, "about the body without organs." Maya nodded. It was perhaps the most difficult of Deleuze's concepts to explain, but also the most essential for understanding what they'd created. "It's not anti-organ," she said. "It's anti-organization, against the idea that bodies, individual or collective, have to be organized in predetermined ways." Below them, the day's activities were beginning. The space flowed seamlessly between functions, a group of kids working on robots while their parents attended a legal clinic. Formerly homeless veterans teaching permaculture techniques to suburban refugees from climate change. Undocumented immigrants leading cryptocurrency workshops for seniors trying to maintain independence. Traditional organizations would call this chaos, Sarah observed. "But look at how it actually functions," Maya replied. "Everyone finds what they need, contributes what they can, becomes what the situation calls for. It's organized, but not by external rules or hierarchy. It's organized by desire, by what people actually want and need, moment by moment." A shout from below drew their attention. Carmen was directing a complex operation involving at least 20 people, multiple vehicles, and what appeared to be a significant amount of plumbing equipment. Maya had stopped asking what any particular project was about. They emerged from needs and desires she couldn't have predicted and took forms no planning committee would have designed. "That's what I mean by desiring machines," Maya continued. "Not machines that desire, but the whole apparatus of desire producing reality. Carmen wants to solve the water access problems in the East Side camps. That desire connects with Miguel's construction skills, Sarah's knowledge of health regulations, the tool library's equipment, the legal clinic's permit expertise, and suddenly there's this productive assemblage creating solutions no individual could have imagined." Sarah opened her folder, revealing pages of notes, sketches, and what looked like mathematical equations. "I've been trying to document the mental health impacts," she said. "Traditional metrics don't capture what's happening. People aren't just feeling better, they're becoming different kinds of people." Maya studied Sarah's notes, recognizing the names of dozens of network participants. Next to each name, Sarah had tracked not symptoms or diagnoses, but what she called lines of flight, the ways people had escaped limiting definitions of themselves and discovered capacities they hadn't known they possessed. Jerome started as an unemployed auto worker struggling with depression, Sarah pointed out. Now he's teaching urban planning, leading meditation groups, and designing renewable energy systems. But it's not that he's found a new career, it's that the categories of worker and student and teacher have stopped making sense. A memory surfaced for Maya, reading Deleuze late at night in her tiny apartment, struggling with ideas that seemed impossibly abstract. "What is God?" she said aloud, remembering a particular passage. "God is the body without organs of desire." Sarah looked at her questioningly. "Deleuze wasn't talking about religion," Maya explained. "He meant something like the creative force that produces reality through its own movement. Not a being that exists somewhere else, but the process by which new possibilities keep emerging from the connections between things." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the complex choreography of life unfolding below. Maya felt a familiar sensation, the recognition that they were participating in something much larger than their individual intentions, something that was using their desires and actions to create forms of life that didn't exist before. "So this is dangerous?" Sarah asked, referring to the title that had started their documentation project months ago. Maya smiled. "Dangerous to every system that depends on keeping people isolated, predictable, and contained. Dangerous to the idea that the world has to be organized the way it currently is." She paused, watching Carmen's water project take shape through the spontaneous coordination of dozens of people who'd never been formally assigned to work together. "But maybe," she added, "that's exactly the kind of danger the world needs right now.